All right, guys. So, just a few more slides. We're going to focus here on cultural changes as a result of European colonization. So, one negative effect would be the loss of culture and history for natives. For example, Cortez, after he kind of wiped out the Aztecs, he also burned books. So there are very few written artifacts, at least from the Aztec point of view. Most of our understanding comes from Spanish priests, the conquistadors themselves, and obviously there's going to be a lot of bias there, right, and a lack of understanding. Um, the Spanish and Portuguese kind of, language was obviously Spanish was brought to the Americas. Probably some syncretism, right? But generally speaking, the native people eventually adopted Spanish. I'm sure that even today, in different parts of Mexico or Central America, there's still going to be a native language spoken. Like so, for example, in Guatemala, we still see, very old, maybe even Mayan language being spoken there today. All right, religion. Missionaries were brought over to convert and educate natives. Um, they established missions in San Diego and Los Angeles and San Francisco, hence those names. It's important that to remember, though, that they did mix native traditions with Catholic traditions to convert natives. So they did allow for some, again, some syncretism. So you have to be able to identify examples of that, like cultural syncretism, and religion is the best way to do it. So examples of that would be that today, the Mexican people who obviously have, their roots in Aztec culture, still observe, the Catholic Saints' Day. So that could be a great example. This is probably the best one to remember, is that during this time, the native people started to develop, or a cult developed around the Virgin of Guadalupe. The Virgin of Guadalupe was a Catholic, um, you know, icon, but because of her dark complexion, natives kind of were drawn to that, or at least drawn to her, um, her as the icon. Right, the Virgin was an icon; it was a statue. And this kind of allowed natives to retain kind of a female presence. It kind of gave them, remember prior to this, they're worshiping goddesses, fertility goddess, for example, and this allowed them to maintain that connection to fertility at least. So kind of retain a female presence in worship. Even today, it's a symbol of Mexican identity. So that's the Virgin of Guadalupe. Von Dune. So in Haiti, we're going to see West African animism, right? Um, Maintained by slaves who were brought over to Haiti, and they're going to combine aspects of Catholicism. So Von Dune is a syncretic religion, again combining West African animism and Catholicism. Voodoo, same thing in Cuba, though. African traditions and Christianity merging. And then Candomblé in Brazil would be Christianity merging with the people of Yoruba, who are from Nigeria. Those would be Portuguese slaves. So definitely, be able to articulate some of these examples, right? Again, native people, right, kind of worshiping this Virgin of Guadalupe because of her dark complexion, and again, this reminder of fertility goddess, or Von Dune or Voodoo. So try to remember two of them, but definitely the Virgin of Guadalupe. All right, so what were some social changes? Very important. Major thing here. A new hierarchy emerges in America, right? So remember, there is no hierarchy per se. It's the Aztec hierarchy, right, where you have your ruler on top, and then your priests, and then obviously your laborers, and then your slaves. Well, now it changes, right? So on top, you're going to have your peninsulares, those Spanish who were born in Spain. Now they're governing, or they're working there, right? So they're on top of the social ladder in the Americas now. Creoles are Europeans born in America. So they would be maybe Spanish, the ancestors of the Peninsulares, for example, right? They're the Creoles. So they're not going to be ranked as high as the Peninsulares. The castas, that would be the lowest class. Those would be the mixed race groups. The mestizos, the Spanish and American mix. The mulattoes would be Spanish and African, and Zambos would be African and Indian. So they're definitely at the bottom. So definitely be able to explain the social class system. It's important because this is when we start to see, at least in the Americas, your race or your ethnicity defines your social status. So we start to see not only a social class system, but a racial hierarchy. So if you're colored, you're on the bottom. That's basically what's being established. And the world had never really seen that, right? In Africa, right, you're not going to see a mixing of people. In Europe, you're not going to see this mixing. So this is where, you're developing these kind of racism in a sense, right? Where if you're of a darker complexion, you're inferior, socially speaking. All right, so a little about the French. Not much to remember. Very simple. They're they're explorers like De La Salle. They're going to be looking for a route to Asia, but they think that they could go north through Canada, which technically you can, but it's very long and difficult. They, along with the Dutch and the English, are kind of looking for this Northwest Passage. So they make it as far as really North America, Canada. And they established colonies there. Quebec, the province or city, was the initial colony, right? If you've ever heard of Montreal, Montreal is in the province of Quebec. Quebec is also a city in Quebec. They're basically going to be trading furs. They're going to be missionary. They're going to perform missionary work as well. They're not settling permanently, and that's important to remember. These are not permanent colonies like the English colonies or the Spanish colonies would be. And unlike the English and even the Spanish, they had much better relations with the natives. They didn't go to war with them. They were not persecuting the natives. They saw the native people as trade partners. So they're involved in the fur trade. So definitely, you want to remember that the French were not developing permanent settlements, and that their relations with natives were much stronger. The English, they were involved in the fur trade too, but not as extensive as the French. English, the first English explorer, who was actually Italian, John Cabot, he too was looking for that Northwest Passage. The English emerge as an exploration power after they defeat the Spanish Navy, or the Armada, in 1588. That's Queen Elizabeth's crowning moment, where she oversees the defeat of this powerful Spanish Navy. And once the Spanish Navy is defeated, the English become this dominant power. And they establish the first English colony, Jamestown in Virginia, 1607. They're seeking gold and silver, right? That's why they're there. Maybe establish a colony, but more or less to kind of obtain those resources that are so important. They were not intent on assimilating. Did they assimilate at times, here and there? But they were not there to mix in any sense. They were engaged in war from the beginning, and obviously in the end, the American government wipes out native peoples across the board. So warfare was very common. The English did establish permanent colonies. Obviously, the 13 colonies. So definitely be able to compare the English colonies to the Spanish colonies and the French colonies. That's a common essay as well. Our early challenges for the English, the early joint stock companies, the London Company, not the British East India Company, but another joint stock company was struggled. They were looking for gold, not coal, and they didn't find a lot, so they had to adapt. The geography was very difficult. Most of the colonists were not survivalists; they were businessmen who really didn't know what they were doing. But the colony survived because of the not discovery of tobacco, but they obviously adapt to the environment, but it's the native people who were already growing tobacco, so they kind of took that from them in a sense. Around 1620, and that's basically what gives rise to the Virginia colony. Native American attacks were very common, so there you go, right? The relations were very poor. Pocahontas, right. The Pocahontas was the famous Powhatan Native girl who saves John Smith, right? Which is kind of an urban legend in a sense, or it's exaggerated, but that's the same place, right? The Jamestown colony and Pocahontas. All right, so what are the new labor systems, right? So African slavery is new, right? Around 1600. The Portuguese are probably bringing African slaves in a little bit earlier. We don't see extensive African slavery in North America into the 1600s, but I would probably say African slavery, at least in the Caribbean, was happening in the 1500s. A new labor system called indentured servitude emerges, mostly in England, the English, and it's a really easy concept. We studied this in U.S. history, right? It's kind of like sharecropping in a sense. But indentured servants were white, Protestant um, uh, migrants who came here. Their debts were their travel expenses were paid for, and they just had to work off their debt. They were rebellious at times. They were difficult, and because of that, eventually um, plantation owners decided to use slaves. Right, the Dutch, New York City, pretty much. Probably not a lot you'd have to remember with the Dutch, except for the Dutch East India Company. Henry Hudson is the Dutch explorer who kind of obviously explores the Hudson River area. 1609, fur and tobacco, and obviously they're trading with Native Americans, and you have the world's worst land deal ever, right? Natives trade Manhattan for a bunch of beads and stuff like that. Eventually, the English would take over in 1664, but um, you know, Manhattan was originally a Dutch colony. All right, that's it.